Good afternoon and welcome to our webinar, Architecting a Data Center for Business. My name is Kevin Cook and I'm a Market Development Manager with Terakai Corporation. Today, I'm pleased to introduce John Butzhart. John is an industry leader on the topic of virtualization, server, and storage technologies and will present on how to optimize your virtualization investments to support your overall business. Without further delay, I would like to hand things off to John.
All right. Our conversation today is going to be about architecting a data center for business. And what we're going to do is kind of explore this chart and discuss about the different ways that really, new technologies that have arisen over the last few years have really changed the way we look at our IT infrastructure. And certainly virtualization is one of the leading proponents for this. But there are other technologies as far as networking, server, and storage technologies that we're going to touch upon that is going to relate and kind of fill out the way we're going to want to look at our data centers in the future. Now there are many different types of virtualization out there that we've been familiar with. Virtualization isn't necessarily just the VMwares of the world out there. We've been doing network virtualization, I would say, for a long time. If you think about it, I don't know if how many technical folks we have on there, but we have something called VLAN technology or virtual LAN technology, and this is the ability to be able to take one switch that you might purchase and carve it up into multiple switches. As a matter of fact, you can take a bunch of switches and have them all act together and create these virtual switching environments. We've also seen network virtualization up here on the scene in other forms as well. It wasn't too long ago when we used to have separate wires that would run to our phone system as well as our normal network traffic out to the internet or to our data center. Over the last few years or so, we've seen a convergence of that technology to IP telephony. So now we're both running our data as well as our phone traffic across the same wires. So certainly we've all touched maybe network virtualization on our networks today. But everything's changing. We're talking more about convergence. So we're going to kind of talk about where this technology is kind of going. There's a lot been going around server virtualization today. And we'll certainly touch upon the different aspects of server virtualization that kind of exist in the environment. I think we're all maybe heard a little bit about that. It's kind of been in the buzz in the industry for the last few years. And on the bottom, there's storage virtualization. When we look at server virtualization, one of the best ways to kind of describe it is as an abstraction layer. We're taking our applications and operating systems and we're decoupling them from the hardware that it sits on. I think the best way to talk about storage virtualization is in the same aspect, except we're taking our data and we're decoupling it from the hardware that it sits on and making it a little more flexible and pliable. And that's really what our discussion is going to be today, is how these three components kind of come together to create our next generation data center. All right, so let's kind of build out in this diagram real quick. So we have existing technologies that we've been purchasing for IT infrastructure, whether that be storage, blade servers, network servers, or even desktops. As we move forward into the next generation of IT, we're going to want to look at all these aspects and really think about different ways that we can do them in our back room. And there are technologies today to help us in all of these areas, or at least view them, and they're going to build a lot of efficiencies and manageability within your infrastructure. And the reason why we want to do this is because, IT has been a cost. And I'm not talking cost as far as price. I'm talking cost as far as our man hours that we're putting into our IT back room. And as this chart says, about 70% of the budget that you guys have out there today is really spent just keeping the lights on and blinking within your infrastructure. And we're only really spending about 30% of the time introducing new applications. And it wasn't so long ago that the economy kind of tanked on us a little bit. I'd be willing to say that this number got squished even further down as we try to make ends meet through the rough storm that kind of exists. So any of the technologies that we talk about today really should help you tip this pendulum into more of a favorable number for you. So you should be really spending more time introducing new innovation on your environment and let the infrastructure kind of take care of itself or deploy itself or provision itself within your IT infrastructure. Right? So let's talk about how things were not so long ago we kind of had this 1-to-1-to-1 ratio. You know, one server, one operating system, and one application. Everything was kind of dedicated. You know, this is my email server, this is my database server, this is my CRM tool. And when we did things like this, we found that it turned out to be very complex to manage. So every single time we needed a new application on our network, we needed to deploy another one of these stacks in our infrastructure. And that was pretty time-consuming in our environment. It's not uncommon to hear new applications taking months to deploy inside our IT environment. Also, you know, we're finding that these resources are tremendously underutilized. And especially when we talk about multi-core technology. I mean, today Intel makes processors with 6 or 4 cores, and typically 4 cores in them. And most staple servers hold 2 of these processors. So what that means is, to an operating system, it really sees, you know, 8 fully functioning cores, or what really are processors in the environment, 8 fully functioning processors, and we're really only installing 1 application in the environment. We don't dare install a second application on this because, you know, something could happen. You know, if we patch one of the other applications or make changes, you know, it may have an adverse effect on the secondary application that kind of exists. Also, the operating system and application are coupled to the hardware. It's not portable. We can't move it around. And business continuity became very complex. We tend to have different solutions put in place for different devices. You know, maybe this is, I back up these files every night. I run this backup job. I have this SQL database mirroring, and this is my backup solution for my email server. Maybe I'm replicating that. But we had different solutions for different applications on our network. There wasn't anything that we could do holistically for our entire IT environment. So it made it very complex. There was also a learning curve that had to go around backup. So if one of these pieces happened to fail, then the whole stack comes piling down. Now, over the last few years, virtualization has kind of came into the fold, and it's kind of inserted a layer inside an environment. Now, I know I only have 1 operating system and application listed on this screen. Certainly, you know, most virtualized environments will have multiple operating systems, multiple applications. Industry kind of says that, you know, when people employ virtualization, they're kind of getting about a 10-to-1 consolidation ratio as far as server applications are kind of concerned. Your mileage may vary. You may get more, you may get less with your environment. But what virtualization has allowed us to do is capture back those wasted resources by running multiple virtual machines on the same physical box. Right? There's also a level of high availability that can be created in this environment. Virtual machines were quick to provision. We could clone them off. Virtual machines are kind of just files that we could copy over and over. But really, has virtualization helped us everywhere? You know, is there any business continuity strategy around the hypervisor itself? You know, and there are times that we do need to provision out the hypervisor layer. And that's still time-consuming. It's still a rack and stack type of model when we look at our infrastructure. There's no business continuity for the hypervisors. And not to mention, not all applications we felt comfortable with virtualizing. Now, I'm here to tell you that we can probably virtualize more and more of our applications as time goes by, but there's some applications we feel comfortable with as physical. As a matter of fact, people who deploy virtualization in their infrastructure are finding that they're able, on average, to virtualize their environment between 60 and 70%. So there's still, you know, some people get a little bit more, some people get a little bit less, but, you know, that's about the industry average of what, you know, we're seeing people are able to virtualize. So there's still a lot of hardware that kind of exists that still has to exist in a physical format. Today we want to think of our IT infrastructure as server profiles and stateless servers. And I think the best way to think about this is kind of a boot from SAN technology. And we'll talk about what a SAN is and some different technologies that kind of wrap around about it. But what if we had a rack of servers in them and none of them had hard drives in them? Right? What is the difference between each one of these servers? There's really nothing. They're all the same servers. Well, if you happen to be a technical person, you're probably thinking, well, you know, my network cards have MAC addresses, and my SAN cards or my fiber channel cards have worldwide names associated to them. And that's correct. You know, that's really the only personality that we're going to find in our server hardware. Well, if we could virtualize these connections into our environment, virtualize these worldwide names and MAC addresses, we can go to a long way to be able to decouple our application stack, whether it's set on a hypervisor or a physical hardware. To kind of give you an example of this, I have this application stack that kind of exists. It happens to exist on a virtualization layer as well. You know, if one day I happen to want to deploy a new server in my environment, I could. Right? And if I'm using this type of technology, again, server profile, stateless servers, boot from SAN type of technology, I could take this virtualized connection, right, and pick up my entire application stack, hypervisor and higher, and reassign that to another piece of hardware. And I can do that on a whim, pretty much as quickly as I could shut down my virtual machine. I could unassign and reassign this server profile with this environment. And then the secondary hardware, the old hardware-headed environment, I could deploy a new application stack in the environment. It doesn't have to be on a virtualization layer. And if I wake up one day and I kind of want to, switch this around, I could switch my profiles around in this environment, whenever I felt like it. Right. So this certainly lends itself to a little bit of business continuity down to the hypervisor as well as the operating system. I could have an extra piece of hardware set aside, another server that I can keep around just in case of business continuity. You'll typically see these type of solutions built into Blade servers. A lot of Blade servers have this type of server profile and stateless servers kind of built into them, or a purchasable upgrade option in the environment. So again, we could have a spare blade sitting around that we could apply profiles to, or it allows us to quickly expand our infrastructure. We could have a generic hypervisor that we could redeploy over and over again, just a LUN that sits on our SAN that we can copy, and then reassign that to another blade. So it allows us to provision and prevent and allows us to be able to provision our infrastructure quicker and create a level of business continuity in our environment. So we're kind of decoupling our hypervisors and applications from the hardware that they sit on in our environment. We can also look at the back end. I've already kind of mentioned the word SAN or shared storage that kind of exists. A boot from SAN type of scenario. Now, there's another movement kind of in the industry as far as the next generation data center around storage virtualization. So again, when we think about storage virtualization, I want you to think about how do we decouple our data from the hardware that it sits on. And how do we make things a little bit more pliable, flexible, able to move things around. Now, first off, shared storage allows us to lower the cost of management of our IT infrastructure by simply, centralizing the storage. If we go with a dedicated model where we purchase servers and put hard drives in, inevitably we're going to run into a point where we wish we could take some storage out of one server and move that to another storage. And that tends to be very difficult if we've got a dedicated type of model. But when we have a shared type of model, shared storage type of model, that becomes a lot easier to do, a lot easier to be able to take storage away from one application and give it to another application. Also, to get the most out of your virtualization solutions, if you're deploying virtualization today and you have a practice, if you don't have shared storage in your environment, then you're really not getting the most out of your virtualization solution, especially in the area of business continuity. So some of the technologies that lead the way as far as storage virtualization is concerned, I'm going to kind of take these out of order. The first is going to be RAIN technology, or redundant array of independent nodes. Today we do a RAID technology internal on servers, meaning that we have a whole bunch of hard drives that work together and act as one and provide a level of continuity, meaning that if one of the hard drives failed, I wouldn't lose any of my data. This kind of takes this technology one step further, and it applies it to our shared storage environment. So I can have a bunch of storage nodes that can be acting together in a single entity, and if any one of those storage nodes fails or happens to go away, right, the other storage nodes would kind of take over, and the data consistency would remain in place. Also, these type of technologies allow me to expand my storage. So if I ran out of storage inside my environment, I could add an extra storage node to my cluster of storage and grow my storage capacity on the fly in the environment. And most of these solutions will not only grow the storage capacity, but also grow the bandwidth that I get coming into the solution. It grows the pipe coming into the storage solution in the environment. These solutions also have, these shared type of storage solutions also have the ability to do replication, meaning I can have a node or a group of nodes working as a single entity on one site, and then at a secondary site, a DR site, I can copy all the ones and zeros, all the files from the first storage cluster to the secondary storage cluster in the environment, and create a level of business continuity in that aspect. There's also deduplication that they're building in a lot of these storage solutions. If you think about it, if I was to email my PowerPoint presentation out to everybody at Terakai, that would probably represent hundreds and hundreds of copies of this presentation that would exist inside, their shared storage solution in the environment. With deduplication, the storage solutions are smart enough to be able to look at that data and realize that there's the same presentation that kind of exists and consolidate that down to one space within the storage. So there's a lot of virtualization style technologies that kind of exist that allow me to grow my storage solution, contract my storage solution, replicate my storage solution, and just generally decouple my data from the hardware that it sits on. Now, one of the things that I kind of skipped over is a SAN volume controller. And this kind of looks at storage solutions in a little bit different aspect. It's still another form of storage virtualization. Let's say I had different storage solutions that kind of existed on my network. Maybe I migrated from a EMC to an Ecologic SAN, but I still wanted to get some use out of my older EMC SAN within the infrastructure. What I could do is take a SAN volume controller, put it in front of the two storage solutions, and actually manage both those storage solutions as a single entity. So this is a way of aggregating different storage solutions to act as a single entity in my environment, to be able to get the most out of the storage solutions that I have within the infrastructure. So this is some of the storage virtualization solutions that kind of exist. And I'd recommend that you look inside your environment. At least look at shared storage when you're looking at your next generation data center. It'll be very important to get the most out of your virtualization technology, as well as to create this stateless server environment. So there's a lot of virtualization vendors. We certainly couldn't talk about the next generation data center without talking about the virtualization solutions that kind of exist. I would, if you haven't looked at virtualization today, I would certainly deploy that inside your environment. It's the easiest way to see a lot of return. Again, instead of using our servers at a low capacity, 10-5%, we'll use them at a more reasonable capacity at around 70-80% of resources that we have in our environment. It's really not a matter of when you're going to start a virtualization practice. If you're going to start a virtualization practice, more a matter of when you're going to start a virtualization practice and to what capacity. If you haven't started down this road, you certainly want to look into it. There's a lot of solutions that are relatively low cost that you can deploy inside your environment and create a lot of these solutions that we'll be talking about around the next generation data center. So when you look at consolidation in our environment, I'm strictly kind of talking about server consolidation. We can really take an IT back room that looks like this. And these rooms are very expensive to construct or to expand. So I've already told you that generally people can get about a 10-to-1 consolidation with virtualization solutions. So with a 10-to-1 consolidation, I can really take 10 racks of equipment and consolidate that down to 1 rack of equipment. And again, moving into some of the new technologies that kind of exist within our IT back room, such as blade servers, right? I can consolidate that 1 rack of equipment down to a half a rack of equipment. So when we do that, I've got an environment that's easy to be able to manage because I don't have so much hardware that kind of exists. Taking less electricity out of the wall, kicking off less heat, spending less on heating and cooling. I've got far fewer people running around doing break fix, and more people doing things that are really make me money for my company. And this is really why virtualization and blade servers have really been seen as a cost-cutting initiative inside our environments. Another way we can look at consolidation of our IT backroom, and another reason to move into virtualization, is Microsoft has made some changes to the way they license virtualized environments. So if we are running Windows 2008 Standard Edition, and I want to create a virtual machine, 4 virtual machines on 1 physical host, I would need 4 copies of Standard. So there's not a lot of savings as far as that's concerned. But where I would see savings is I could upgrade actually to Windows 2008 Server Enterprise Edition. And 1 license for Enterprise will allow me to run 4 virtual machines on 1 host. Right? I've already told you that consolidation ratios come up somewhere in the area of 10-to-1 or even 8-to-1. Once we get to about 8 virtual machines on 1 physical host, the cost is very negligible to move to Data Center. Data Center Edition, Windows 2008 Data Center Edition, allows us to run unlimited virtual machines per physical host in the environment. And you will get to 8 virtual machines very quickly because the consolidation ratios answer to it pretty quickly, as well as, you're going to be spinning up test environments. It's easy to try out new ideas inside your infrastructure. If somebody has an application that they think might make sense within your environment, it's easy to copy off a new Windows machine from the master goal image. Virtual machines are just files. You just copy the file and deploy it within my infrastructure. So this makes it in a way where you don't have to worry about the Microsoft licensing. You just buy Windows 2000 Data Center Edition for each one of your physical machines in the environment and just start creating virtual machines to your heart's desire. Microsoft also says that we must license our environment for the maximum amount of virtual machines that could possibly run within our infrastructure. So a lot of the technologies that kind of exist, I'll name a few VMware technologies, vMotion or high availability, allow us to make our virtual machines more flexible and movable within our infrastructure. If I had 2 servers, they're each running 4 virtual machines, and I deploy something like VMware HA or VMware High Availability, and one of the hosts fails, right, all 8 of those virtual machines are going to be running on the secondary host. Microsoft says that I have to license both the hosts for the maximum amount of my virtual machines. So I have to actually get 2 enterprise licenses for this environment, or, again, buy the data center license. So you want to keep that in mind. That number certainly gets to be exponential. If I had a 3rd server running 4 virtual machines, I have to license all 3 servers for 12 virtual machines within an infrastructure. Right? So it makes sense. You get the data center pretty quick, but it's a good thing because it's easier to manage because you just need to buy the data center license for the physical host within your infrastructure. So let's talk about a little bit about business continuity and disaster recovery in these type of environments. When we talk about business continuity, we're really talking about higher availability for all applications. So we're really talking about building, business continuity at a lower level than an application level. Our entire data center is built with business continuity in mind. Right? First of all, with the virtual infrastructure, I have an automatic restart of virtual machines in the event of hardware failure. I do need shared storage to take advantage of this. So if a physical server or physical blade happens to fail, all my applications will restart up on other physical blades within the infrastructure. Live migration exists, and this is with technologies like VMware's vMotion that allows me to migrate virtual machines from one host to another. IDC tells us about 90% of downtime in an environment is planned system downtime. So think about your IT environment. Think about the last time an application went down. IDC tells us that's about 90% of the time that's planned system downtime for the infrastructure. When you move to a virtual environment with shared storage, right, that kind of goes away. I can migrate those applications from one host to another, work on the physical component, bring it back up, and re-migrate these virtual machines back on over. And that's without any downtime. So if the application that you wanted to migrate happened to be an email server, I can make that migration happen while people, during work hours, during work days, people could be sending out email blasts, adding appointments to their calendar. What do they normally do with that resource off that email server? It would remain available as this migration took place. Also, the cost of setting up a disaster recovery site can be dramatically reduced when we look at a virtualized environment, because then our virtual machines are just files that exist on shared storage, and I can copy them from one site to another. So again, high availability is built in your data center. Right? I can alleviate planned system downtime, unplanned system downtime, and I can lower the cost of setting up a disaster recovery scenario. To give you a little further flavor for that, let's kind of look at our infrastructure today. So virtual machines are just files. Right? I can open them up on this year's technology or last year's technology as long as I have the same software to be able to open them up. So what a lot of people will do is as they decommission servers at their main site, they'll move them over to a secondary site, right, and bring them back online. And they'll allow SAN-based replication to be able to clone those virtual machine files from one site to another on an ongoing basis as the ones and zeros change in the SAN. And then there's certainly software add-ons that we could add into this environment to be able to fail over from one site to another with one big red button. And the product I'm kind of thinking in mind is VMware Site Recovery Manager. Again, I don't mean to keep on bringing up some of the VMware products. This is meant to be a generic conversation, but some people have run into these products as they've kind of searched for solutions in their infrastructure. So the idea here is, we can lower the cost with virtualization and shared storage technologies to be able to create a level of high availability that stretches all the way across your entire data center. Again, we're architecting a data center with business continuity in mind. So if you're an organization who's maybe explored virtualization and decided that the consolidation ratios didn't really add up, maybe you have 5, 10 applications within your environment, and consolidation didn't really pay for itself very well for you, I would maybe re-explore virtualization from the business continuity aspects, for the simple fact that all these applications will stay up and running even in the worst case circumstances. The next portion that we should look at is the way that we're currently dealing with our current desktop infrastructure, current desktop and laptop infrastructure. And maybe, decide if desktop virtualization is something maybe we should deploy in our environment. Again, we should look at our IT infrastructure just a little bit different. Certainly, VDI offers us another opportunity and another way to enhance provisioning and manageability within our infrastructure. So the total cost of ownership of really individual desktops is very high, and I've seen a bunch of studies that are out there, and they all say between $700 to $1,000 per PC to be able to maintain them with the infrastructure. And the costs are varied. Hardware maintenance, change. Every 6 months somebody releases a new desktop and the old one kind of goes away. Change management, unplanned downtime, limiting users' productivity. So if their physical desktop fails, they're not going to be very productive until somebody comes to fix them. Not to mention the cost of sending somebody out to go fix that desktop or laptop in the environment. But with virtual desktops, you're going to be able to lower the cost of this type of solution. So 70% of desk side support maintenance is really, it goes away once you move into a VDI type of solution. So intensive break fix desk side visits become unnecessary as we centralize our desktops. So when we talk about VDI, we talk about actually, instead of having the processes and virtual machines running local on a desktop, they run inside your IT back room, and we connect to them through a host of devices. And those devices could be a great variety of things. They could be, certainly old laptops and desktops. They could be thin clients. And if you don't know what thin client is just a box. It's just a little appliance that'll allow us to send mouse clicks up into the virtual machine, keyboard strokes up in the virtual machine, as well as do screen refresh updates in the environment. So, really, we can still use older desktops and laptops, but they turn to really be, rudimentary devices. They're just kind of portholes into what our virtual desktops are kind of doing. Also, keeping our virtual desktops locked away within our safe data center, make sure that information doesn't get lost. A lot of us have heard the horror stories about road warriors losing their desktop and losing their laptop while on the road. Certainly, when that happens, we have some fear of sensitive data ending up out in the wild out there, whether it be credit card information or customer information that kind of exists. When we look at centralizing our desktops in our environment through a VDI solution, we're really locking them away in a safe data center. And anywhere that anybody has a broadband connection and a PC, or laptop, they can get access to their virtual desktop. And if they happen to lose that device, they don't lose anything of any importance because the information is kept within the data center. There's a new generation of VDI that's out and about that allows us to further enhance manageability. I've already told you a couple times that virtual machines are files, so it's simple to be able to deploy new virtual machines within an environment. I could take a master copy of Windows 7 and maybe Office is installed on that and copy that over and over again. But if you think about it, if I say my operating system, my applications takes up 10 gigs of space, and I copy that 100 times for 100 users, that turns out to be 1 terabyte of very expensive shared storage within an infrastructure. So there's really got to be a better way that we can provide virtual desktops. Also, if I happen to copy those virtual machines, I still have to patch those on an ongoing basis. I still have Microsoft releases security patches and updates. I still need to be able to apply those. And I'll have to do that on an individual basis in that type of format. Well, the next generation of VDI, what I like to term VDI 2.0, it really helps us to be able to create that environment, a more manageable environment with a virtual desktop. If you think about it, a complete user's environment really consists of the user data, the operating system, as well as the application. And what these new solutions allow us to be able to do is to be able to assemble these three components like Legos within an infrastructure, like it was a puzzle. I'll give you a little bit of an example. Let's say that a customer from XP to Vista. Now, when they moved to Vista, they realized that maybe Vista wasn't the best thing since sliced bread, and they wish they could downgrade back to XP. But to be able to do that in a physical environment, it represented a little bit of difficulty. It almost represented as much of a cost as moving forward within the infrastructure. So a lot of customers, a lot of people like you, just kind of dealt with it and kind of hacked it up to experience and figured workarounds and things like that. When we look at the next generation of VDI, because we have this kind of Lego approach to building our infrastructure, I could actually reach into the operating system, and remove Vista, and then come back in and replace it with Windows XP if I felt like it. I can do that on a whim. I can do that in such a fashion which won't disrupt the applications that run in that environment, as well as the users' documents that they've created within that infrastructure. Also, that operating system is saved in a singular fashion, meaning I've got one copy of the operating system that everybody uses within this infrastructure. So whether I'm talking, if my operating system takes up 10 gigs of space, so whether I'm talking about 100 users or 1,000 users, it really only takes up 10 gigs of space in my shared storage. Applications could also be bolted on into this environment. I actually have the ability to run conflicting versions of applications. So I could run Office 2007 along Office 2010 on the same operating system if I felt like it. And again, the applications, those versions of Office maybe take up 10 gigs of space. It only takes up 10 gigs of space if I'm talking about 10 users or 1,000 users within the infrastructure, because we're all using the same copy of the application. Now, it doesn't get you around any Microsoft licensing. You still have to make sure Microsoft has their due. The operating system licenses that you're going to want to look for inside a virtual desktop environment are called VDA license, or what used to be called VECD licenses, or you would need software assurance on your existing operating systems within your environment. Right, but it allows us to be able to manage our infrastructure and put it together as our users' demands dictate. It also allows us to be able to singularly patch and manage both operating system and application. If a new service pack comes out in this environment, we can we just apply that to the base image, and then that gets deployed out to the rest of the user environment as soon as they log off and log back in. So desktop virtualization really represents a larger opportunity in your environment. And when I talk about the opportunity, I'm not necessarily talking about the opportunity from a CapEx perspective. If you look at the cost of buying new desktops as opposed to deploying a virtual desktop environment, the cost is going to be about the same. But the ongoing management and maintenance of the infrastructure is significantly reduced when we move into a virtual desktop environment. Next, let's explore green computing. Now, if we look at consolidation, at least from the aspect of virtualization, and I'm talking about a 10-to-1 consolidation ratio, we can see a lot of savings within the electricity that we kind of pull out of the wall. So I don't know, the study that I have here shows that for every server that you plug in for a year, it's going to cost you about $250 to be able to power it and about $300 to cool it. So for every application that you can virtualize, you're saving yourself about $500. Now, if we multiply that by the server consolidation ratio of about 10-to-1, that's about $5,000 per physical server that you could save within your environment. So that makes a lot of sense when we move to a green environment. Also, we could look at deploying thin clients within our virtual environment, or moving to a VDI practice. Thin clients really use less power than a traditional PC. And when we multiply thin clients by the amount of PCs we have in our environment, 100, 200, 1,000, we can really save about 80% of the cost of our electricity bill by just moving into a combined server and virtualization practice, server and desktop virtualization practice. The moral is, it's really going to cost you more to be able to. It's going to cost you more to power this equipment within the next 5 years, and it's actually going to cost you to purchase the equipment. So we will probably want to move to a strategy which will create a more green infrastructure. Next, we're going to talk about different network services that kind of exist for the next generation data center. There are a lot of virtual appliances that are coming out to plug into an infrastructure. If we look at a lot of the appliances that exist, whether it be a firewall, an anti-spam filter, and you kind of crack open the box, you're going to see some similar components. There's going to be a processor, there's going to be a RAM, there's probably going to be some type of hard drive inside that box as well. Sounds a lot like a computer. Well, it certainly is. So we're seeing kind of a trend in the industry to actually create virtual machines that actually act as these appliances in the environment. And you'll see a lot of solutions that are out there around malware detection, mail security, firewalls, or intrusion detection infrastructure. But it's really not limited to security. There are certainly solutions around the shared storage piece, which are called virtual SAN appliances. So again, these storage nodes I can create as a virtual entity inside my virtualization solution. And there's also collaboration software. So as we move to this type of solution, we're kind of creating a cloud-style environment. A popular solution that kind of exists out there in a virtual environment is a Cisco Nexus 1000V. All virtualization solutions have this concept of a virtual switch that exists. This virtual switch is sometimes difficult for network administrators to get, be able to manage. There's a bunch of things that are kind of happening on the virtual network that they have no access to within the environment. If we replace that generic virtual switch with a Cisco Nexus 1000V, we can actually manage the physical environment alongside the virtual environment. So we can manage our virtual switch alongside our physical switch. So network administrators, are familiar with the command line interface. They can actually interact with the Cisco Nexus 1000V through a command line interface in the same fashion that they manage their physical switches. So now they can extend their security practice or their network practice, from the physical environment on into the virtual environment. So there are a variety of applications that kind of exist that can be deployed into a virtual environment that allow us to look at our physical environment, our physical security, our physical networking in a little bit different fashion. So virtualization really touches all aspects of our infrastructure. Next, let's explore provisioning. So earlier on in the conversation, I talked about a converged network, converging our telephony traffic with our data traffic over the same wire. Now, as network pipes get bigger, we're seeing a trend into more convergence around fiber channel over Ethernet. And this is the ability to pass our SAN traffic over the same type of connection that our LAN and voice traffic will go over. And really, the catalyst for this is 10 gigabit Ethernet solutions that are out there. So 10 gigabit pipes into our network allow us to be able to provide these types of solutions. So instead of putting physical cards inside our servers or our Blade solutions for our SAN environment as well as our LAN environment, we're going to run all that traffic off of two very large 10 gigabit pipes in our network environment. If we think about it, especially when we talk about virtualized environments, there is really the need to have a lot of connectivity within our infrastructure. So in a typical VMware server or a typical virtualized server, you're going to see a network adapter that's going to be available for our management traffic. There'll be another network adapter that'll be available for our heartbeat traffic or our high availability traffic. And we'll probably have a couple network adapters for our LAN traffic. And also, so we can talk to our shared storage piece, we'll probably have a host bus adapter to be able to talk to that as well. And if you've been counting with me, that will be 5 cables coming out of the back of our server. And if we want any redundancy, we're going to need to double that or give ourselves 10 cables within the environment. Okay. And now when we talk about typical rack mount servers, maybe if it's a 2-use server, I can fit about 20 of those servers into a rack. Right? That makes about 200 cables that are flowing within our rack and our environment. So that tends to be a very, very very complicated solution or very difficult to be able to manage. If we have to track down a bad cable or reprovision a server within our infrastructure, it becomes very hard to do. If we replace all those cables with a couple converged network adapters, a couple 10 gigabit converged network adapters, I'll only have 2 cables that'll come out of my environment, but I can make virtual connections into this infrastructure. If I was actually to, if I actually wanted to install, Windows 2008 in this environment, I took one of these convergent network adapters and carved it out into 4 network adapters and a host bus adapter at a virtual level. I could actually look inside Device Manager and see these physical pieces that would exist in a virtual format. Right? So it allows us to be able to create virtual wires and virtual cables into our IT infrastructure and be able to pick those up and move those around whenever we see fit. So instead of racking and stacking and cabling an infrastructure, I'm just moving virtual wires between different components in my infrastructure. So provisioning becomes a lot easier when we look inside a next generation data center solution. So we're talking about blade solutions, shared storage, virtualization, kind of working together to be able to quickly provision our infrastructure. So deploying new applications within an environment can take hours rather than weeks and weeks. From concept to creation, we could really meet our business objectives a lot faster. The final piece that I'd like to talk about that kind of sums everything up is really management. So if we build our infrastructure based on the next generation data center, we're going to find that we're going to have an infrastructure to be able to adapt to a lot of economic climates. We're going to be able to grow or contract as our business sees. The environment's going to be easy to manage the provisions. We're going to be able to do a lot more with a lot less within our IT infrastructure. It's also simple to maintain application availability. Business continuity gets pulled from an application level down to a data center level. So applications you haven't even dreamed of in the future are going to be built with business continuity in mind. You're going to be able to meet a lot of your business objectives a lot quicker. We're going to be able to automate the process for introducing new services within our environment. It's going to cost less time and less dollars to be able to deploy those services in the environment. You're going to be able to react quicker to new profitable ideas and get the leg up on your competition. And you're going to see a lower cost of maintaining your infrastructure. All right, you're going to be moving to more of a service-oriented model of providing application in your environment instead of a proactive model. You're going to be able to wire once, and you're going to have fewer physical cables within your infrastructure. You're also going to lower the cost of loss of revenue due to system downtime in your environment. So we're going to enhance our management within the infrastructure. We're going to standardize the process of introducing new IT applications within an environment. It's going to make better use of your IT administrator's limited time. That kind of brings us back to this chart and the overall emphasis of building your next generation data center. Don't just look at it as a server virtualization practice. Really look at it to where, can you deploy these technologies to kind of further tip that pendulum instead of spending 70% of your resources keeping the lights blinking to kind of tipping that pendulum to where you're only spending 30% of that time keeping the lights blinking and 70% of the time you're introducing new applications and services with your infrastructure. So some key solutions and cases that you should look at is server consolidation containment. The whole law of numbers. Fewer physical servers in my environment means I'm pulling less electricity out of the wall, spending less on heating and cooling. I've got far fewer people running around doing break fix on a great many machines, and more people doing things that will impact the bottom line. It's easy to provision the next generation IT infrastructure. If it's running on a virtual environment and I need to deploy a new application, I could clone off that copy of Windows 2008 and get to work right away. If I happen to over-virtualize my environment, I could add another server to my farm. It's easily done through a blade server. I could virtually connect the wires into my SAN infrastructure and then get rolling right away and watch the entire environment load balance itself. Business continuity. And we're talking about business continuity for the entire data center, whether it be a virtualized application or a non-virtualized application. I can alleviate planned system downtime, unplanned system downtime, and lower the cost of setting up a business continuity strategy. Test and development. It's a lot easier to test ideas inside a virtual environment as opposed to a physical environment. If I have a new Microsoft security patch that rolls out, I could clone off that security patch, I can clone off that production system and virtualize it in its own network, and then apply that security patch. And if it works, I could do all my testing on it. If it works, I go back to the production machine, take a snapshot of that machine, kind of freeze it in time. And I'm talking about, whether it be a virtual layer or I'm talking about a physical layer. I can apply that security patch to that machine. If it works, I go vault my day. If it doesn't work, I can just revert that snapshot and get back in business. This as opposed to tape backups, which could take me hours and hours to get back into kind of a revenue-generating mode. We should look at our desktop infrastructure a little bit different. Maybe decide if desktop virtualization is for us. It's easy to deploy a desktop virtualization solution from a singular image of an operating system and an application. It can allow the infrastructure to clone itself off for as many users we have in an environment without taking up a lot of storage space. Right? All the management benefits that we receive out of a server virtualization strategy can be multiplied when we look at a desktop virtualization strategy. For every one server that we have in our back room, how many desktops do we have in our environment? And then finally, legacy application rehosting. A lot of us have legacy applications that exist in our environment, and we're kind of afraid what's going to happen when the hardware kind of fails on them. It's going to kind of set an upgrade cycle in motion. We're going to need to buy new hardware, and when we buy new hardware, we're going to find out it's not going to support our old operating system. It's not too bad. We'll buy the latest operating system, apply that to that new server, go grab our old application, and it no longer installs on the new operating system, so we have to buy a new copy of the application. When we have to go through this entire process when what we had worked just fine. It was really failing hardware that made the business decision for us. What I would do in that case is I'd use some of the P2V software, so physical to virtual software that kind of exists, and convert my physical machine, lock, stock, and barrel into a virtual machine and run it for however long I want to. A lot of virtualization solutions have support for operating systems that were made a long, long time ago. For example, VMware supports DOS and Windows 3.0.1 applications. I don't think too many of us have those running around past their usefulness, but we have that support that kind of exists within the infrastructure. And by the way, you get something that you probably never dreamed of for that old application, and that's business continuity. So that's the entire presentation that I'd like to show you today. So just keep in mind that look at your IT infrastructure a little bit different. Look at tipping that pendulum from being a 70-30 type of pendulum and switching it around to be more inside your favor.
John, thank you so much. With that, let's jump right into the question and answer. Our first question here is from Graham. And Graham wants to know that, he says, we've been virtualizing our server infrastructure for quite some time, but have not had success beyond second-tier applications. How can I help my management get over the fear of virtualizing our core business-critical applications?
Yeah, certainly. So I hear this story a lot when it comes to like email and database servers. People are a little bit afraid to kind of virtualize those. And if you do a little bit of research on the web, you probably run into some papers or documents that might kind of back that solution. But I kind of look at the date of those documents. They probably tend to be a little bit older. Most virtualization solutions that are out today can really create some pretty large virtual machines in the environment. You could create virtual machines with 8 virtual processors and up to 255 gigabytes of RAM. But there's not too many email servers or database servers or any application servers that really need that much resources to be able to run in the environment. And on top of that, being able to run that inside a virtual environment means I get a lot of business continuity. Business continuity in a physical infrastructure is pretty difficult to be able to maintain. And again, we do it on an individual basis, an application individual basis. When we talk about business continuity inside a virtual environment, we're talking about, from every application that kind of can exist within the infrastructure.
Here's another question, this one coming out from Rick. Rick asks, you talked earlier about network virtualization. What is your take on appliances versus network functions that can run on a hypervisor?
So I think appliances are starting to get mainstream nowadays. Certainly the Cisco Nexus 1000V is something that I see a lot of customers deploying out there, a lot of people deploying out there. Some of the other virtual appliances are still starting to, gather steam and move forward. I would certainly look at them inside your environment because they certainly do represent a lower cost model within your infrastructure. Plus, sometimes physical appliances that exist have no way to be able to monitor virtual environments. So you need to kind of, put some type of solution in place for your virtualized network within your infrastructure. But certainly things like the Nexus 1000B could certainly help that, be able to extend that network, bridge the gap between the virtual network and the physical network. But, as far as these appliances, the sky is the limit as far as what we're going to see kind of coming out. Currently today we're seeing as a virtual appliance some antivirus solutions for virtual desktops. Isn't it, if I'm writing a piece of malware, and I want to attack an operating system, I'm going to write that piece of malware to be able to attack the antivirus software that's going to exist on that desktop. Well, solutions are starting to come out to where we're taking that piece of software out of the virtual desktop and starting to do virus scanning at a hypervisor level, so beneath the operating system. So those solutions are starting to pop out today, and it's just a different way to be able to protect our network. So there's a lot of things that are coming out for virtual appliances, and I certainly would explore that for your networks.
Excellent, John. Thank you. One last question here. I'm having some trouble sizing my servers and storage. How best can I approach making sure I don't paint myself into a corner when selling virtualization to my manager?
Well, I would say it's very important to bring in the people at Terakai to be able to size that environment for you and be able to scale that out and do a capacity planning study within your infrastructure. Once they do that, they're going to be able to tell you exactly what you'll need to be able to virtualize your environment, and it'll help you to be able to move forward and making the next decisions. It's always good to have somebody who's been through the experience to help you through your experience.
Excellent. Thank you, John. And I'd like to thank all of you in the audience for your participation and questions. I hope this webinar met your expectations. Terakai Corporation will be hosting these regularly, and we'd love your input on topics. Thank you again, and have a good afternoon.